Hi guys, my name's Sheila. I decided to do my older adult video presentation on my uncle, who is my mom's oldest brother. He's the oldest of 7 children, and I chose him because he's probably gone through the most out of all of my mom's siblings. My uncle is also the only one that has really dealt with a lot of issues in his life. He's gone through substance abuse issues, and he's also the first one of his siblings to get a bachelor's degree. He had a lot of responsibilities growing up. He often was taking care of his siblings because his mom and dad were working a lot. So here we go. With Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, I decided to choose the 6th stage, which is intimacy versus isolation. This stage happens with what Erikson considers young adulthood, which is when the person is between the ages of 18 and 40, according to Erikson. In this stage of development, the individual is looking for both intimacy and closeness in their relationships. The individual learns to give and take with a significant other without sacrificing their own identities. If the person cannot establish intimacy, they're at risk for isolation as they move into adulthood. And the basic virtue that individuals will receive from this stage, if completed successfully, is love. I decided to choose this stage because I felt that this was when my uncle had experienced the bulk of his issues in his life. But he was able to overcome these issues and make his life better for both him and his family. So important experiences in my uncle's life from this stage were he was living in a part of Philadelphia with his family that was starting to get really bad and impoverished, and there was a lot of violence going on around them. So when he graduated from high school, he was really unsure what he wanted to do with his life. He was the first of his siblings to graduate, and his family was extremely poor, so he knew that there wasn't any money for him to go to college. So he decided to apply to SEPTA, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a public transportation service in southeastern Pennsylvania. Just like the subway, buses, trolleys, all that stuff. So he ended up getting a job driving a bus. He did begin saving at this time and knew that he wanted to eventually go to school. It was also around this time that he decided to ask his girlfriend at the time to marry him. They got married young, and they were partying a lot with my mom's siblings and their friends. And drinking was just such a common activity for their family. So he didn't really notice anything was wrong at this point. It wasn't really until he began to miss work and was just running into all different problems that all seemed to stem from drinking. Was when he kind of noticed that he had a problem. And he started to realize how much this alcohol addiction was controlling everything around him in a negative way. He really struggled with trying to stop using because of his environment. Everyone in their family drank almost every day, and he expressed to me how hard it was to quit when everyone around him was constantly drinking. He even felt that when he did stop drinking, his family and friends and wife were kind of isolating him a little bit because he wasn't doing the same things anymore. His wife and him went through some difficult times during this period because she was still drinking a lot around him, and he felt that they wouldn't last if she continued to do this, especially around him. It was around this time they started to develop more friendships with people that were sober, and people that had just gone through the same addiction that he has. So once he started to hang around these kind of people, it was much easier for him to remain sober, but he still didn't really know what to do with his life. He still had his job at SEPTA, but he just knew that he could do more, which is when he did decide to pursue a bachelor's degree. So some challenges that my uncle faced during this stage was obviously first his alcohol addiction, which was more of a personal problem. However, it was difficult for him to overcome this problem with the environment that he was in. Another challenge for him during this time and after that was that his wife was still drinking around him, and that was really hard. He felt isolated from both his friends and family after he stopped not doing drinking. So this is where his intimacy versus isolation problems kind of started. He was feeling isolated from people that were still drinking and did not feel the intimacy with his wife at this point in time. He felt that their lives kind of revolved around drinking before, and now there was something missing. So the biggest accomplishment for him during this time was that he decided to go to college. His job was paying the bills, but he knew that he could do better. No one in his family had ever went to college, and came from a very low income family. And even though he had to go to college part time, he did eventually graduate and climb the ladder at SEPTA, where he does still work today. So the psychosocial crisis resolution. The biggest issue for my uncle during this time was probably his alcohol addiction and eventually getting and staying sober while still being around people that were using. The drinking just seemed to be a root of all problems, which was why he decided to get sober. He had a lot that he wanted to accomplish in his life and saw that he couldn't really do this if he was still drinking. One thing that he really wanted to do was have kids. And my aunt knew that if she got pregnant, she would stop because she kind of had to. So she kind of wanted my uncle to get sober before they really started trying to have kids. So this was a huge struggle for them at this time as well. But he did eventually get sober, so that was good. The second article of my annotated bibliography was about the impact that adolescent substance use can have on family function and gender differences. So the article looked at if substance abuse affected the functioning of the family rather than if the function of the family made an adolescent use. And for boys, the article did find out that alcohol and marijuana use predicted components of family function, including the communication with the son and the mom, the family cohesion, and the family adaptability. Which his relationship with his mom was very important. They were all very close with their mom, more than their dad. So I thought that this article really stuck out to me. So my uncle started his journey to get sober through a variety of ways. He didn't really have money or time to go to rehab, so he just did it on his own. Kind of just quit cold turkey. First, he would get sober and relapse, like usual. This was more when he lived at home with both of his parents because they were drinking a lot. His siblings were drinking. And the first big step he took was finding a new group of friends and other family members that didn't really drink, which was difficult for him just because of the environment. Drinking was just a way that his family bonded, and a lot of the family activities always included drinking. They still kind of do, but he's really overcome that. This is where my first article of my annotated bibliography kind of came to life. The article was a study that looked at how someone's neighborhood can affect what kind of drinker they are and how it can affect both the alcohol and the neighborhood can affect the first 4 years of a marriage. Found that men drink more than females, and that drinking was more problematic for couples who lived in more dangerous neighborhoods, which I also found very relevant to my uncle's life. My uncle also decided to eventually go to counseling for his wife and him because he felt that he needed it at this time, especially because a lot of their previous activities were centered around drinking. My uncle had decided to put a lot of time and energy into running and working out and just focusing on school instead of drinking. So he kind of forwarded all of his energy into that. So I think that the things that facilitated this resolution were probably mostly his family. If he didn't really get out of his house and get away from the people that he used to hang out with, he probably would have continued to relapse throughout his life. But this is also a time where he started his own family and had a child who he wanted to stay sober for, so that side of the family kind of helped him. Um, I also think that his positive attitude about his neighborhood, as I'll speak about later, um, his extreme dedication, his outgoing personality, really helped him to get through this time. The only type of oppression was really when he was driving a bus. He got stabbed in the back by someone who just because he was a different race, and there was also just a lot of fighting in his area because it was a time when black and white people would just kind of fight for no reason. So it was they were kind of fighting over the neighborhood. Um, so one of the factors that could have inhibited my uncle's resolution to this addiction was that it runs in his family, so it's genetic. And he could have chosen to not handle it the way that he did. He could have stuck to what he knew and just continued the path that his family and parents have gone down, and got by financially, but would have remained in the same social class. But he took it upon himself to get a degree and change his status. When looking at all of the systems that affected my uncle's life, I would say that family was something that was very important, but it also did hinder him sometimes. Some were not supportive, but his new family and his child did help him to stay sober after everything. I would say that his community was a hinder on him just because of the way that everyone was still using around him. And the institutions that really helped him were college, going to AA, going to counseling, and his job that helped him achieve the goals and eventually rise up. The other theory that I decided to choose for this presentation was the ecological theory. So this was developed by Urie Bronfenbrenner. According to Rogers, this theory explains human development by describing aspects of the individual, the environment, and the interaction between them. This theory also argues that people are active in their environment and are not passive. It also argues that both development and environments are always changing. So I chose this other theory because I think that is something that's not usually looked at, especially with my mom's side of the family, because the environment that they grew up in was very chaotic, and they could have chosen to let these barriers really prevent them from doing the things that they wanted, but he didn't. He changed the path and went on to do incredible things, and the environment became extremely impoverished, and there was a lot of crime as they got older, but he remained positive throughout the whole time, and I think that really helped him. The limitation that I saw with Erikson's stages were that we could only really discuss one stage. I had a hard time deciding because there was so much that happened, especially in 67 years. I also noticed that some of the other stages did apply, but they did not happen around the time period for the age. So some of the stages happened, but it wasn't around the right age that my uncle was, so I didn't want to pick that. And this one was the one that seemed to work best. And after doing week 6 readings, it made me think about how different these stages are based on how old someone is and how adults are taking so much longer to get married nowadays. And I think that they could be edited and reevaluated today. I also had the last 2 articles that I used did not fit as smoothly in my presentation, so I decided to add them in here.